All right, everybody, I want to welcome you to Pastor's Point of View number 166. Today is May the 21st, 2021. I'm back with my friend, colleague, fellow elder, associate pastor, Dr. Jim McGowan. And my name is Dr. Andy Woods. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. If you're new to Pastor's Point of View, we typically do these for an hour or more sometimes.
Sometimes.
More
More
often.
is less, right?
Yeah, that's right. More often than sometimes, but we try for an hour. Not very successfully sometimes. But having said all that, we try to come to you usually on Fridays and just sort of do a weekend review in terms of the culture war, Bible prophecy, things happening in the world. And so we're going to bring you today yet another prophecy update. Here is our 5-part outline that we're going to try to work through briefly today. And our first point is the world against Israel. So what is happening to the nation of Israel as I speak in terms of these rocket bombs that she's experiencing? I want people to understand that this is actually engendering worldwide hatred against the nation of Israel.
It is.
Now, that shouldn't surprise us because the prophet Zechariah said that's what would characterize the last days. Would you mind reading Zechariah chapter 12, verses 2 and 3?
All right, Zechariah 12, 2 and 3 out of the NASB 95 update. Behold, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes staggering to all the peoples around. And when the siege is against Jerusalem, it will also be against Judah. It will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it.
All the people, all the nations gathered against it, who? Jerusalem, as she becomes a cup of trembling in the last days.
Yes.
Now, this wasn't in our notes, but I was just thinking of Ezekiel 37, verses 7 and 8, that great end-time regathering prediction. You know, the bones coming back together, representing the whole house of Israel. And it says over there, so I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied there was a noise. Behold, a rattling, and the bones came together bone to bone. I looked, and behold, the sinews were on them, and flesh grew, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. So it's interesting that verse 7 of Ezekiel 37 says that when Israel is regathered in the last days, it's not going to be a quiet process. Ezekiel, when he saw this in the 6th century BC, basically saw an event that to him sounded very noisy. And behold, the bones were coming together. He actually says here a rattling sound.
Yeah.
So I would say that's happening today, wouldn't you, Brother Jim?
Yeah, definitely.
Because the attention of the whole world is now focused on Israel, and the world is coming against Israel just like God said it would.
Yeah.
And we have another prediction of this in Zechariah 14 and verse 2. Can you read that to us?
All right. Zechariah 14, 2. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, and half of the city exiled, but the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city.
So again, all the nations against Jerusalem. And if you look at our map here of the nation of Israel, and we've gone over this in prior PPOVs. I think we mentioned this briefly last time in PPOV number 165. But there's Gaza in the southwest corner of Israel. That's the area that had the Israelis turned over to the so-called Palestinians in 2005. And they had one and only one election, and they elected Hamas. And that's the area where the tunnels of terror have been dug into the land of Israel as a beachhead for terrorist activity. And that's the part of the nation where these rockets are being fired into the nation of Israel, and this has been going on for the last week or two.
Yeah, Hamas.
Hamas. Now, the thing that I want people to understand is this is not just this animosity that is now coming against Israel. This is not just a Hamas issue.
Right.
This is something that has engendered worldwide hatred against the nation of Israel. So you'll notice this particular article here from the Jerusalem Post by Jeremy Sharon, May 18th, 2021, and it says anti-Semitism surges worldwide in wake of Gaza campaign. In the UK, cars bearing Palestinian flags drove through London and used a loudspeaker to declare, and there's some profanity here, which obviously I won't read, but blank the Jews, blank their daughters, blank their mothers, and rape their daughters.
Yeah, imagine that.
So this is happening in the U.S., the U.K., Canada, and beyond. This is not just a Gaza situation.
Exactly.
And what does that brief paragraph say?
Anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S., U.K., Canada, and beyond have spiked significantly since the beginning of the IDF's military campaign in Gaza last week. According to the Community Security Trust, the communal Jewish security organization in the UK, there were 86 anti-Semitic incidents from May 8 to May 17, compared to just 16 incidents in the 10 days prior.
So anti-Semitic incidents are up worldwide. In fact, we have this brief caption here, and it says watch, and then it says pro-Palestinian mob attacks Jewish man in Canada.
Yeah.
While chanting an obviously Islamic phrase, Allahu Akbar. So this is happening in Canada. And there's a name that people should know, and it goes by the abbreviation OIC. And you should know something about the OIC. That stands for the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. This is a conglomeration of Muslim nations that wield a disproportionate influence, 57 of them total, in the United Nations.
Yeah.
You remember when Obama said that he had campaigned, I think, in 57 states, if I remember right. That number 57, I think, perhaps comes from here.
Just happens to coincide with this.
Yeah, and so that's sort of interesting. But we have this article here from Janet Mefford, a Christian radio talk show host. The title of her article is The Coming Geopolitical, Multicultural, and Interfaith Utopia, and it's in a book called The Coming Pagan Utopia, Christian Witness in Tough Times. The editor is Peter Jones. And I like what she does here because she gives a brief description of the OIC. And what does she say there?
Janet Mefford explains that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, is the second largest intergovernmental agency on earth. It is a 57-member permanent delegation to the UN, whose stated objective is to be the collective voice of the Ummah, the nearly 1.5 billion Muslims worldwide. Its main supporters and leaders are Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Kuwait, Turkey, and Egypt. Its aim is to defend Muslim interests and to develop a global political Islamization. Attorney and author Andy McCarthy, who successfully prosecuted the Blind Sheikh for his role in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, calls the OIC, quoting, the closest thing in the modern world to a caliphate. which he describes as an institution of imperial Islamic rule under Sharia Muslim law, close quote.
So that's a pretty good summation of the OIC.
That tells you what's going on.
And if you want to know why the United Nations never comes out with a pro-Israel decision,
Yeah.
if ever, and why 2/3, I think it was, of their rulings are against the state of Israel, something like that, you know why.
There
it's
it
because
is.
of the influence of this 57 group nation conglomeration called the OIC. Well, in the wake of these bombings and rocket firings that have just happened, just recently, the OIC is flexing its muscles again. And here we have an article from Jihad Watch by Christine Douglas Williams. And the title of it is Organization of Islamic Cooperation to Go to the UN to Take Serious Measures to Hold Israel Accountable. So who is responsible for all of the guilt that's happening over there right now? Well, it's Israel, of course.
Of course, yes.
See, it's like a bully that comes up and, beats you up at school, and you're a little person and you stand up to the bully, and then you start swinging back, and then the police, not the police, the teachers. We used to call them, we used to have a name for them. They're not crossing guards, but like recess monitors, or I don't know what they were. So
Playground monitors?
Yeah, something like that. So the playground monitor goes up and gets on the case of the young person defending themselves and
Right.
lets the bully off the hook.
Yeah.
That's what's happening now with this OIC in the United Nations.
Over and over again.
Over and over again, and we're going to see in a second that the Pope is involved with it.
Yes.
So what does Robert Spencer's Jihad Watch say here?
All right, and this is from May 17th, by the way.
Yes, May 17th.
In an
Just happening.
Yes, just happening. In an emergency meeting convened at the request of Reforming Saudi Arabia, the 57-member Organization of Islamic Cooperation, 56 nations, plus the Palestinian Authority, is going to the United Nations to seek General Assembly support, quote, to protect the Palestinian people, close quote. The OIC did not suggest what measures to protect the Palestinians can be taken in the face of Hamas rocket attacks against Israel and the latter's retaliation in defense of its sovereign nation. At the heart of the ongoing strife between the Palestinians and Israel is the Palestinian unwillingness to recognize a Jewish state, as is evident in past wars instigated in efforts to obliterate Israel. Should Israel return to the 1949 armistice line, it will be a death sentence to the country, and this fact is well known in Muslim countries. That line has also been referenced as the Auschwitz borders. Given the record of history and the mandate for Palestine, the lands captured in the 1967 Six-Day War belong to Israel, and there is no occupation. Many Muslims and Muslim countries have claimed to recognize Israel's right to exist. But when put to the test and asked about the armistice line, they refuse to support Israel's right to Judea and Samaria, as well as the strategic Golan Heights, which would be disastrous for Israel to surrender. Nor will they allow for a unified Jerusalem, ignoring or denying that Jerusalem has always been the holy city for Jews, long before Islam claimed it. Jerusalem is not even mentioned in the Quran. Hamas has made its war against Israel about Al-Quds, that's Jerusalem, in order to fuel Muslim rage. The OIC, along with many mainstream leftist media outlets, have accused Israel of being aggressor, when the truth is that Israel is yet again defending itself amid a relentless barrage of unjust criticism and propaganda.
So here come the rockets into your country. And of course, Israel tries to defend herself, and it's Israel's fault,
Yes.
according to the OIC. And not only are the rockets coming in from Gaza, but there is now, apparently, according to these articles we've been looking at, worldwide hatred being engendered against Israel from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and beyond.
Yeah.
And if all of that weren't enough, now we see the Pope and Turkey getting involved.
Yeah.
And so we have this article here from AA.com, May 17th, 2021. Turkish President and Pope Francis discuss Israeli attacks on Palestinians. Israel's attacks are not only against Palestinians, but all Muslims, Christians, and humanity, says Mr. Erdogan.
Yeah, that's a name there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's quite a name. So Israel defends herself, tiny Israel defends herself from unfair attacks, and everybody is blaming Israel.
Yeah.
And Turkey is now blaming Israel. No surprise there. And the Pope is now blaming Israel. And the Pope and the Turkish president, Mr. Erdogan, have a phone call conversation blaming not the Palestinians, not Hamas, but Israel.
Right.
I mean, is this, and the reason I'm covering all of this, is this not the outworking of what Zechariah said would happen? The world would come against Israel.
Right.
And Israel would be a cup of trembling that would cause the nations reeling. And you're seeing it happening.
It's starting.
In real time.
Yeah.
Now, we're not saying that we're in the tribulation
No.
period yet, but certainly the stage is being set.
Yeah.
And there's a trend obviously in place that's not going to be reversed. It's going to accelerate.
That's
but
right.
anyway, tell us about that article.
All right. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Pope Francis spoke over the phone on Monday and discussed Israel's ongoing attacks on Palestinian territories. During their conversation, according to a Turkish Communication Directorate statement, Erdogan said an atrocity is being committed in Palestine, adding Israel's attacks are not only against Palestinians, but all Muslims, Christians, and humanity. Apart from blocking access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, restricting the freedom of worship, killing innocent civilians in the Palestinian lands, violating the human dignity, Erdogan said, the occupying of Israel is also endangering regional security. Erdogan said all humanity should unite against Israel's illegal and inhuman practices.
Can you read that last part again?
Erdogan said all humanity should unite against Israel's illegal and inhuman practices that also violate the status of Jerusalem.
You see, when the Pope and the leader of Turkey and the OIC and various unilateral actors in the U.S., the U.K., and Canada, and when they start saying these words, all humanity should unite against Israel's illegal and inhumane practices, if that is not an explanation of what Zechariah saw 500 years before the time of Christ, I don't know what is.
I agree.
And that's exactly what Ezekiel saw when he saw this rattling and this noise as Israel was coming back as a nation. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. Let's continue. Erdogan stressing that the international community should give Israel a deterrent response and lesson it deserves and take concrete steps in this direction. Erdogan said the Palestinians will continue to be massacred as long as the international community does not punish Israel, which has committed a crime against humanity. He noted that Turkey has carried out intense diplomacy at all relevant international platforms, especially the UN. But the UN Security Council could not display the necessary sense of responsibility. On Israeli attacks on Palestinians, Erdogan underlined that Pope Francis' continued messages and reactions regarding Israeli attacks on Palestinians will help mobilize the Christian world as well as the international community.
So let's get the Christian world, the Muslim world, the international world, all dogpiling on Israel when Israel is defending herself against an attack.
This is absolutely amazing. Who would have thought that a Muslim leader would be calling upon Christians
Yes.
to mobilize against Israel?
Well, that shows you what's being taught in churches,
Well,
which is
sure.
the doctrine of replacement theology.
That's right.
You know, that Israel has no future,
Yeah.
which is a doctrine that we reject here, you know, at Sugarland Bible Church. But, you know, let's kind of go through these two guys here. They're having a phone conversation, according to the article. In fact, here's a picture of them. It says Turkish President and Pope Francis discuss Israeli attacks on Palestinians. Israel's attacks are not only against Palestinians, but all Muslims, Christians, and humanity, says Mr. Erdogan. Whenever you see Turkey involved in anything, prophetically you have to pay attention to it, because according to our map here, there's going to be a great invasion of Israel in the last days. It's predicted in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And one of the major players in that conflict is going to be Turkey.
Yeah.
In fact, if you get my little book, The Middle East Meltdown, I explain in that book exactly why the names Meshach, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah are all references to Turkey.
Yeah.
We don't reach that conclusion in the book by newspaper exegesis. You reach that conclusion by tracking what's called the Table of Nations in Genesis 10, because those names are mentioned in Genesis 10,
Yes.
and just figuring out where those groups settled. And when you consult scholarly sources like Herodotus, who wrote around 450 BC, and Josephus, who wrote in the 1st century, they tell you exactly where those groups went. And those groups went to an area that today we call modern-day Turkey. And if you look at this chart here, ancient names from Ezekiel chapter 38, verses 1 through 9, you see all these names that are going to be involved in this last days coalition. You'll notice here that Turkey engenders 4 names.
Yeah.
No other nation is named 4 times in Ezekiel 38 and 39, but Turkey is. Meshach refers to Turkey, Tubal refers to Turkey, Gomer refers to Turkey, and Togarmah refers to Turkey. And so, as we like to say, let's talk Turkey. And when Turkey starts calling for a worldwide hatred against the nation of Israel, I say this, Brother Jim, I'm not a date setter, but I would say this: we better get our bags packed.
Yes.
Because the rapture is right at our doorstep.
Come, Lord Jesus.
And, let's talk just for a minute about the Pope. The Pope is involved in this phone conversation. What you have to understand about the Pope is the religious voice of the New World Order. Because for this conglomeration to have any lasting effect, it has to have moral authority. And who better to give it moral authority than the supposing voice of Christendom on planet Earth, the Pope himself?
Yeah.
It's highly likely, and I can't be dogmatic about it, but it's highly likely that the Pope is going to end up being the false prophet
Could be.
that you have in the second half of Revelation 13. Again, not dogmatism, but it would sort of surprise me if that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And you need the Pope involved from the New World Order perspective because you need the voice of moral authority. So when the Pope is talking to the leader of Turkey about we've got to get the world united against Israel, you have to understand that we're living in a time period where the prophecies of God's book, the Bible, are literally jumping off the pages.
Yes.
Now, again, let's be clear. We're not in the tribulation yet, but these are all trends
Right.
that we see happening that aren't going to do anything more but accelerate
Exactly.
as we get closer and closer to the
Yes.
end of the age. And as this anti-Israel sentiment and the fires of anti-Israel mindset are stoked, Here we have this article from worldisraelnews.com where Facebook, as all of this is happening, and I guess they're using these Gaza attacks as sort of a pretext for engendering this worldwide hatred against Israel. As all of this is happening, Facebook is taking down or took down the largest pro-Israel page after an Islamic attack, I guess, on that page. And it's an article by Paul Schindman, May 19th, very recent, 2021, and this contributes to this worldwide hatred against Israel that I'm speaking of.
Yeah.
What does that article say?
The largest pro-Israel Facebook page was shut down by the social media giant after it was targeted with anti-Semitic vitriol by radical Islamists, CBN reported Wednesday. Established in 2002 by well-known pro-Israel activist Mike Evans, the Jerusalem Prayer Team had more than 75 million followers when it was the victim of a massive anti-Semitic attack by Islamists whose posts on the page led to Facebook shutting it down. That's interesting, isn't it? The two-pronged attack started with posts on Facebook and YouTube telling anti-Israel activists how to report the JPT Facebook page to Facebook and demand it be taken down. In the second stage, a disinformation campaign claimed that Facebook created the JPT page during the current conflict and is forcing people to like it even when they don't.
You get the idea that all this is coordinated.
Yes, oh yeah.
It's sort of like what happened in the wake of the George Floyd issue.
Yeah.
This coordinated response. And, you know, the OIC is doing its thing, the Pope is doing his thing, Erdogan is doing his thing, and now you have a bunch of Muslims involved in a two-pronged attack against a dominant Jewish presence on Facebook, and Facebook is doing its thing simultaneously of taking down the page.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because it seems to me that certainly what we know about Facebook in recent months is the power that they have over their program. Why couldn't they just have gone in and removed the anti-Semitic comments and left the page up?
Yeah.
But they didn't choose to do that. They shut down the pro-Israel Facebook page.
Yeah, which
with 75 million people.
75 million followers. It's like they're trying to censor
that's exactly
a particular perspective that goes against a narrative. And the narrative is this: Israel is responsible for what's happening over there, when Israel's doing nothing more than defending herself. Well, that's a huge issue in our prophecy update. Let's move here to another one, and it has to do, Brother Jim, with number 2, the whole issue of globalism versus nationalism.
Yes.
Probably one of the most dominant issues of our day. We know from the Bible that there's coming on the scene at some point a one world government.
Yes.
It's predicted in Daniel 7 verse 23. What does that prophecy say?
Daniel 7:23. The fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it.
See, this is the final form of Gentile rule before the second advent.
Yeah.
And it unambiguously predicts a coming one world government.
Yes.
And we've taught through the book of Daniel here at this church. I would encourage people to listen to that series.
Yeah.
Because we show in that series how the prophecies of the book of Daniel in the near term all happened with exact precision.
That's right.
Because he made some short-term predictions and some long-term predictions.
Yeah.
So when Daniel makes this prediction under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, only a foolish person would discard this and say it has no relevancy to our time. This coming one world government, you see it here in this slide called Satan's Goal of Globalism. These prophecies of one world government aren't just found in Daniel 7 verse 23, they're found in Revelation 13 verses 7 and 8 and verses 16 and 18, and they're also found in Revelation 17 verse 15 where the harlot is sitting on the waters.
Yeah.
And the waters are defined as the peoples, nations, multitudes, and tongues, which according to Revelation 5 verse 9 represent the whole world.
Yes.
Revelation 5 verse 9 uses those same designations for those for whom Christ died.
Yes.
We believe in the universal atonement, that Christ died for everybody. So just as Christ died for everybody, the Antichrist one day is going to rule over the entire world.
Yes.
So that contributes to the policies of the current administration, the Biden administration, and I would call them America Last policies.
Yes.
We are now under administration, which is recycling what was happening under the 2 terms of the Obama administration,
Right.
before Donald Trump providentially interrupted these policies. And I would call it a mindset that is not to make America great again. It's not America first, it's America last.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that America is basically too powerful, too independent, too rich, and so she has to be lowered so she can take her proper place in the family of nations amongst the New World Order. And so America, as we speak, is being deliberately demolished
Right.
by design.
Yeah.
And you don't have to look very far to see this. Here is an article from foxbusiness.com, May 18th, 2021, very recent. And it says, Biden clears the way for the Russian pipeline
Yeah.
after blocking the Keystone pipeline in the U.S.
Oh boy.
The Nord Stream 2 deal will transfer Russian gas to Germany via a pipeline running under the Baltic Sea. So we're going to help Putin with his pipeline,
Yeah.
but America with her pipeline and all of the workers that lost their jobs because of the eradication or the blocking of that pipeline, we're going to destroy America's pipeline, but we're going to help Russia build its pipeline.
Right.
There's a brief paragraph here, but what does that say?
Yeah, and that also after they just shut down our lines going to the East Coast here recently.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
Well, this is good thought here. All right, here's the article. On his first day in office, President Biden issued an executive order canceling the Keystone XL pipeline at home in the U.S. Stunning. In defiance of U.S. law, Biden is actively helping Putin build his pipeline. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican Texas, wrote on Twitter, objectively speaking, the Biden administration is shaping up to be the most pro-Russia administration of the modern era, close quote.
You see, your average American looks at this and they're just outraged and they scratch their head. And the reason they're doing that is they don't understand prophecy.
Right.
Prophecy demands that a new world order come into existence. And to do that, you have to destroy, by design, the existing economic and political powerhouse of the world, the United States. So a decision has already been made amongst the globalists.
Yes.
Mr. and Mrs. America that are wrapped in their American flag, and I'm wrapped in my American flag too, that want borders and they want to make America great again and all of these kinds of things. What they don't understand is the people that are currently running our government do not have that mindset.
That's right.
They have already made a determination that the playing field has to be leveled.
Yeah.
So let's redistribute the wealth globally.
Yeah.
Let's bring down the wealth over here and increase the wealth over there. And that's the glasses, the lenses, or the paradigm through which the Biden administration looks at the United States of America.
Yeah.
It's an imperialist power that needs to be intentionally lowered. And if you understand that that's their paradigm, then the decisions that they're making fit the paradigm.
That's exactly right.
If you don't understand their paradigm, what they're doing doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So what I have tried to argue here is that the Biden administration is really Obama's third term. And if you backtrack to 2011, you will see Obama doing this exact same thing, regarding the decision to ban offshore drilling.
Right.
They banned offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico and other places near the United States, but they got on board with it in Brazil.
Right.
And I had to dig into the archives to find this, but this is an article from the New American, March 24th, 2011, by Raven Clabo, I think is how you say that. And it says Obama commits American support to Brazilian oil. It's a rather lengthy article, so why don't you just read the underlined section there at the beginning?
All right, and let's see if this doesn't sound very much like the article we just read.
That's exactly right.
Following the infamous British petroleum oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, the Obama administration took the opportunity to target oil companies and American workers by issuing a moratorium on offshore drilling. Why then is the Obama administration helping Brazil to expand offshore drilling?
Yeah.
Which is what the article says.
And the article goes on and talks about that.
Yeah.
Well, why is that? Because Biden is completing Obama's third term, so he's pursuing the same policies.
Yeah.
And the guy that interrupted these policies is the MAGA guy, Make America Great Again,
Yes.
who was not a globalist, but a nationalist,
Right.
and actually wanted to build a wall around the United States of America. That's why he, in his 4 years, was an interruption of these one world policies.
That's why they had to get rid of it.
And that's why they had to get rid of him.
Yeah.
The election was stolen. Anybody that has two brain cells to rub together can see that. In fact, all you have to do is watch the video footage of them reaching into under the table in the middle of the night and manufacturing votes out of thin air. The voting machines with this Dominion software were rigged. My friend Brandon House has produced 3 documentaries revealing this,
Yeah.
how our election system was hacked by foreign sources, why those swing states in key districts and counties were all stopped simultaneously in the middle of the night
At the same time.
to switch the election outcome.
Yeah.
And it's obvious that the election was doctored. And when you understand the globalist agenda, you understand why it was doctored. Trump had to be removed.
Right.
So Biden could have Obama's third term, and so that their path towards one world globalism, one world distribution of wealth that started in 2011 could be completed. And guess what, Brother Jim? It's being completed right now.
Yes, he's the puppet president.
Yes. And so that becomes a key piece of information when you reveal a prophecy update, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
And as all of this is happening, the media is propagandizing the American people in a way that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
I've always seen media propaganda, but the intense level of lies is unrelenting. And so Chris Cuomo, otherwise known as Fredo,
Yes.
is at it again. And we have this article from lifenews.com and May 18th, 2021. It says CNN host Chris Cuomo says pro-life people are racist and religious extremists. And so this takes us into our third category here, Brother Jim, of media propaganda. But tell us about that article.
With the Supreme Court set to hear a Mississippi case to challenge Roe v. Wade next session, CNN primetime host Chris Fredo Cuomo once again spit venom at those who were pro-life. He flaunted his ignorance of the pro-life movement as he suggested they didn't understand science, while also being pro-racism and akin to Jim Crow. And, like a dunce, he claimed it was the Fourth Amendment that addressed the right to privacy.
Whoops.
Yes. Quoting, "The first major test of a woman's right, her liberty, controlling what happens to her body, since Trump got his third and final justice on the Supreme Court, has been set. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, her place on the bench as an outspoken advocate against reproductive rights, The next battle in the evolution of Roe v. Wade is upon us. The Supreme Court of the United States will hear a case that could remove a woman's right to control their own body. Though medical capabilities may be moving the point of viability well short of where it was assumed to be in 1973 with Roe v. Wade. So you would think some of the proponents of harsher measures would want the science involved, a political lever to use a distraction from policy in solving problems. But again, it's not about science or consensus. It's about dividing lines, legislating to the far right, white fright vote, flooding the zone with 536 bills that abridge a woman's right to control her own body in 46 states. It's just like voting rights in one way. It seems like the far right only cares about protecting humans before they are born. And now we have a much more conservative group of judges, one of whom, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, is an outspoken opponent of any reproductive right in this regard, close quote.
So here we go. First of all, Chris Cuomo, this is the kind of insanity that you get hit with.
Quite a bit of rambling going on there.
If you were to watch, where does he do his broadcast? I guess this is CNN.
Yeah.
I think I misspoke earlier. I said LifeSite News. I think this is Life News, where I got this article from. But remember, Chris Cuomo was the guy that's been preaching masks.
Yes.
And he's been caught in public many times without his mask on, to the point where his own apartment manager had to, correct him and send him a notification. And we've dealt with that on a prior PPOV. But one of the reasons you know you're being propagandized is you see statements that blatantly contradict each other. So here Chris Cuomo says he's upset about this potential Supreme Court ruling restricting abortion. And basically he says a woman can control what happens to her own body. That's their mantra.
Yes.
And isn't it interesting that that mindset disappears in a New York second or New York minute when we get into vaccinations?
Isn't that interesting?
Vaccinations are mandatory. Everybody's got to be vaccinated. Either get your mask on or get vaxxed. And if the mask is on, that's a way to shame you because you haven't been vaxxed. And you better get vaxxed and vaxxed quick or you're going to lose your job. Well, what happened to a woman can control what she wants to do with her own body? Suddenly disappears.
Yeah. Well, she's smart enough to get an abortion, but she's not smart enough to understand viruses.
That's exactly right. So that's how you recognize propaganda. It contradicts itself. You'll also notice here, Brother Jim, that he uses this expression concerning abortion, which he wants to protect at all costs. Reproductive rights. Reproductive justice.
Yeah.
What a joke.
Yeah.
You have to understand, folks, that every time someone gets an abortion, a heart stops beating.
That's right.
Brain waves cease from acting. And so whenever someone throws this expression, reproductive rights, reproductive justice, rights to do what? And justice to do what? To murder another human being. And you'll notice also here, Brother Jim, how he talks about the science.
Yes.
And it's about consensus. That's an argument that we would call an odd populum argument, which is the idea that the majority is always right. If the majority votes on something, it must be true. Now, isn't it this same crowd of scientists that have been telling us that evolution is a scientific fact?
Right.
And they've been telling us that climate change is a scientific fact. And now they're telling us that what's going on inside the womb of a mother is not a baby.
Right.
And that's a scientific fact.
Yeah.
So that's what you call odd populum. The majority isn't always right. And, you know, all these people that are talking about abortion and science, do they not know how to look at a sonogram?
That's a good point.
I mean, science, what are we talking about? By the time a woman is pregnant with the medical technology that we have, it's obvious that what is happening inside of her,
Sure.
is a child. So how come that never gets factored in with science related to abortion? So he throws this word science around, and then he also says here that it's just like voting rights in one way.
Yeah.
The far right only cares about protecting human beings that are born. And he talks about here how it's actually racist.
Yeah.
Can you find that part there?
Yes, before they're born, at the top of the page 7 there.
Yeah, can you read that?
Yeah, it starts over here. It says, it seems like the far right only cares about protecting humans before they are born.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, that's an argument that you're hearing a lot lately because they're arguing that, well, I'm pro-abortion, but I'm in favor of protecting a child from their second abortion. In other words, if we kill them in the womb, then they won't have a miserable life. So I'm really pro-life.
Yeah.
I've heard Christians use that type of thinking.
Yeah.
And it's silly. And he talks here about it being pro-racism towards the beginning of the article.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for a little earlier. It says, he flaunted his ignorance of the pro-life movement as he suggested they didn't understand science,
Yeah.
as well as being pro-racism, akin to Jim Crow. So if you're pro-life, it's racial.
Yeah.
If you're pro-life, you're in favor of the Jim Crow South. If you're pro-life, it's just like the Jim Crow South preventing black people from voting. And I'm thinking to myself, does he know absolutely nothing about Margaret Sanger and the founder of Planned Parenthood?
Yeah.
And her blatant racial statements,
Absolutely.
calling black people weeds, and making speeches in front of the KKK in her day, and saying and setting up Planned Parenthood for the purpose of depopulating the black race.
That's exactly right.
And putting Planned Parenthood operations in areas that are minority areas to bring down the black population. And people that are pro-life are racist.
Right.
I mean, if you were to read this or watch his show and believe this, you would be swallowing some of the most absurd and ridiculous propaganda available. And yet what I'm afraid of is your average person looks at that and to them it sounds good.
Well, they don't know history.
Yeah.
That's the problem. By the way, can I make a quick comment here?
Absolutely. I've been talking too
I
much.
wonder if you caught something here. Here he's talking about abortion and women's rights and all that kind of stuff. And of course, we know that in the pro-abortion movement, they constantly refer to the fact that the fetus is not a human. But did you see what he said there at the bottom of page 6, top of 7? He says, it seems like the far right only cares about protecting humans before they are born.
Is that a...
Oops. Little Freudian slip or something there?
That's what I was gonna say, potential Freudian slip.
God caught him.
So my goodness, folks, propaganda, Satan is the father of lies, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
Well, cheer up, folks, it gets worse. When we're talking about propaganda, here we have also from lifenews.com, Kirsten Gillibrand, Democratic presidential candidate, says pro-life laws protecting babies from abortion are against the Christian faith.
Oh, boy.
So she's going Christian on us. And she's, like the Pope, siding with Turkey, trying to put a Christian authority, so to speak, on being pro-abortion. What does that article say? Written by Stephen, Eartelt, May 17th, 2019.
All right. Democratic presidential candidate Kristen Gillibrand says pro-life laws protecting babies, I didn't think they were babies, from abortion are supposedly against the Christian faith. Gillibrand appeared at the Georgia State House on Thursday to condemn the state for passing an abortion ban this past week, which pro-life Governor Brian Kemp signed into law. Quoting her, if you are a person of the Christian faith, one of the tenets of our faith is free will. One of the tenets of our democracy is that we have a separation of church and state. And under no circumstances are we supposed to be imposing our faith on other people. And I think this is an example of that effort, close quote, she said.
Okay, let's hold off for just a minute on these Bible
Just
verses.
a couple of problems here.
First of all, and by the way, I've heard Chelsea Clinton make this argument that being pro-abortion and getting rid of laws protecting the unborn is somehow the Christian thing to do, the biblical thing to do.
Well, I'm going to listen to her.
And it's kind of interesting that when she's queried aggressively about this, which happens every once in a while, she talks about her faith not in God, her faith not in the Bible, but her faith as a Methodist. They bring up their, Hillary and Chelsea all bring up their Methodist faith really quick. Well, the reason they're talking about the current state of Methodism rather than the Bible is the Methodist Church, not in every case, but in most cases, left the Christian faith a long time ago.
Sure.
So when she talks about abortion, she talks about being a Methodist.
Right.
She doesn't talk about the Bible,
Right.
which is what John Wesley, the Wesley brothers, the founders of Methodism, stood on.
Yeah.
It's just another example of an apostate denomination. And here Gillibrand says, look, folks, having a pro-life law violates free will.
Yep.
And free will is a Christian virtue. Well, free will to do what? I mean, if I use my free will to end the life of somebody else, isn't there one of the commandments in the
believe
Bible
there is.
dealing with that? I think it's commandment number 6, isn't it? Thou shalt not murder. And she goes on and she says we shouldn't impose our faith on other people. Well, aren't they imposing their will on an innocent unborn child by destroying it,
Yep.
in the womb?
Yes, indeed.
And then she goes on and she talks about the separation between church and state, words that are not even found in the First Amendment. Now, if you want an analysis of the so-called strict wall of separation between church and state, I'd challenge you to listen to our pastor's point of view number 130, where we explain the origins of that phrase, where it came from, and how it's not mentioned in the First Amendment at all.
No.
So,
No, it's not.
and then Gillibrand ignores all of the pro-life verses. And this Life News article brings up those pro-life verses. What are some of those?
The article goes on and says, Gillibrand is apparently not familiar with a number of Bible verses that clearly call for respect for human life, condemned killing people, and celebrate human life in the womb. How about Psalm 127:3? Truly, children are a gift from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. How about Psalm 139:13-15? You knit me in my mother's womb, nor was my frame unknown to you when I was made in secret. How about Psalm 22:10-11? You have been my guide since I was first formed. From my mother's womb, you are my God. And St. Paul's letter to the Galatians, Galatians 1:15. God from my mother's womb had set me apart and called me through his grace. And finally, Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, God says, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you.
So no wonder they want to talk about a leftward denomination rather than the Bible.
Right.
Because the Bible doesn't support pro-abortion, pro-choice, so-called pro-choice arguments. How about, here's one that was left out, how about Luke 19, verse 44, where Jesus says they will level you to the ground and your children within you.
Well, yeah, there you go.
How about, boy, don't get me started here, Brother Jim.
Man.
We may never get out of here today. How about Genesis 25 and verse 23? I mean, you guys want to talk Christianity. Well, we're going to talk a little Christianity
do that.
here. Is that okay? What about Genesis 25:23? The Lord said to her, 2 nations,
Yeah.
where are those 2 nations? They're in your womb. And two peoples will be separated from your body, and one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. That's happening in the womb of their mother. So
but they weren't human, right?
it just irks me to no
Come on.
end to see people use spirituality or Christianity as a justification for the pro-abortion movement when the God of the Bible knows of no such thing.
They call evil good and good evil.
And they do it in the name of God.
That's exactly
And
right.
that's what irked me about this
I'm irked too.
Kirsten Gillibrand comments. And that's why we've got this filed under today, media propaganda. Massive media propaganda to the point where Christianity itself is even being rewritten.
Yeah, and ignorant Christians are buying it.
Exactly. It's tragic. Let's, as time permits, let's go here to number 4, cultural Marxism. Now remember our friend, I put friend there in quotation marks, Antonio Gramsci. Gramsci must have had a demon speaking in his ears, because he himself, if he were alive today, would be startled at the progress of the cultural Marxist movement in the United States. You have to understand what Gramsci taught. He did this from prison, and he wrote what I would call his prison epistles. That Buttigieg, who ran for president, you remember, his father was a Gramsci scholar and translated the Gramsci prison letters, kind of like the NIV version, I guess, of the Gramsci letters. That's how close communism is in terms of knocking at the door of the United States of America. But Gramsci, you remember, is the Italian communist who basically told his fellow communists that you're doing it all wrong. You don't topple a host culture or an existing culture through force.
Right.
You do it by taking over the influencers of a society, whether it be entertainment, media, education, the printed page, academia, you name it, anything that generates thought. And what you do is you take over those institutions and you change the value system of a culture from the inside.
You infiltrate.
Yes. And then, as Khrushchev said, it will fall into your hands like an overripe piece of fruit. And the communist conquest of an existing culture and replacing that culture with the utopian communist model, which communists have done all over the world. That's the way to effectively bring in lasting change. And boy, I tell you, whatever demon spoke those words into his ears must be laughing right now, because this is what is happening in the United States of America, and this is what we call cultural Marxism. And to see cultural Marxism, Brother Jim, you don't have to go any further than to your local Barnes and Noble bookstore. And here we have this article from WorldNet Daily, and it's about a woman named Renee Times. I guess you can find her on Twitter. And it says this: a woman is shocked by woke cancel culture books in the baby section.
In the baby section.
At Barnes & Noble, and this is by Joe Kovacs, May the 16th, 2021. So what's going on here?
A South Florida woman was so shocked recently by woke and cancel culture books being sold in the baby section at Barnes & Noble, she recorded the titles and posted them on Facebook. Quoting, she says, "Oh my Lord, parents, please wake up and see what's happening." That was what she posted. And this is Renee Times, a Republican precinct committee woman in Palm Beach County. Quoting, "I took a trip to Barnes & Noble to buy a children's gift. Check out some of these titles and how our children are being indoctrinated into this woke cancel culture we are witnessing right before our eyes. You gotta be kidding me," she says. "I'm at Barnes & Noble. Look at these books."
So woke, cancel culture, critical race theory, as we've developed on prior PPOVs, is nothing more than Marxism.
Yeah.
Marxism recycled. And here you are, you're exhausted as a mother, which is a very difficult job, particularly with babies, toddlers, etc. You take a trip to your local Barnes and Noble bookstore, and what are you hit with? You're hit with cultural Marxism. This is exactly what Gramsci said to do.
Exactly.
And they're targeting the youngest of the young.
Yeah.
Here's one book that you would run into, and you can find this in this particular article about Renee Times. My first book on feminism. I don't know what age group that would be.
But if you were a little kid, you'd want to pick that book up and look at it.
It looks very inviting, but you'd be exposed to feminist doctrine. Here's another book that you'd be exposed to called Anti-Racist Baby.
Unbelievable.
Here is another book that you'd be exposed to called Baby Feminists.
Oh boy, that's a good one.
We're worried about kids going to college and being indoctrinated. Well, forget all that.
That's what we used to worry about, yeah.
They're being indoctrinated at the earliest of ages through very attractive literature.
Yeah.
Here's another one called Woke Babies Are Up Early.
Yeah.
Woke babies raise their fists in the air.
Yeah, right on.
Woke babies cry out for justice. Now, obviously, what they mean by that is social justice, redistribution of the wealth. Woke babies grow up to change the world into what? One world Marxism.
Goodness gracious.
And here is, I think this is a fifth book. It says, No.
Yeah, that's a good one.
My first book of protest.
Right.
So let's create an army of protesters.
Yeah, like you need to teach a baby to say no, right?
To bring in the communist
baby
communist
protest.
revolution.
I can see it now.
And I can guarantee, as you look through these books, there's not a single pro-American sentiment.
Yeah, no.
It's the idea of white privilege. America is imperialist and racist at its core, and so we need to burn down the American plantation. And so when this army of people shows up and votes for Bernie Sanders, that's where it came from. Cultural Marxists worked on these kids at the earliest possible age.
I'm speechless.
You're speechless.
I'm just speechless. This is ridiculous.
Even Judge Judy, there's a picture we have here of Judge Judy. Judge Judy Shineland. You ever watch the Judge Judy
yes,
show?
I have.
It's interesting. It's like the old People's Court, I remember, with Judge Wapner. She's tough. I wouldn't want to mess with her.
No.
But you'll notice that Judge Judy has had enough. She's had enough of this. Here's an article from FoxNews.com by Julius Young, May the 14th, 2021, last week. And the title of it is Judge Judy Says Cancel Culture is a Frightening Place for America. And she's not a big fan of the PC police.
Yeah.
Judge Judy Shineland is set to begin producing her new series, Judy Justice, for Amazon. But this is just a brief paragraph, and what does that say?
Judge Judy Shineland is striking down cancel culture and called the now common societal practice a frightening place to be, in the sense that people could be afraid of expressing their true and authentic opinions. Quoting, to have a fear of speaking your opinion for fear of being put on somebody's list and canceled, it's a frightening place for America to be, close quote, she told the Hollywood Reporter. I'm not a big fan of the PC police.
So now that we're all dependent on the internet, the tech gurus just have to, from Silicon Valley, who have a leftist worldview, just have to push a button and you disappear.
That's right.
Disappearing persons.
Yeah.
And Judge Judy is not a fan of it. And I say to what Judge Judy says here, amen. Let's wrap up our thoughts, Brother Jim, unless you want to add something.
I think I'll not.
to our fifth and final category, which is global persecution. You know, the persecution against Christianity worldwide is accelerating in a way that I never thought possible in my lifetime. So now we have, I think there's been three, if my count is right. Now we have a fourth Canadian pastor, in addition to Arthur Pawlowski. Remember, he was the one that drove the money changers out of the temple.
Yes.
And he's been jailed. I don't know what his immediate circumstance is. There was another fellow that was jailed and put into a maximum security prison. And now we have somebody else. And I'm probably forgetting one or two along the way. But there's about 3 or 4 of these Canadian pastors that have run afoul of the law for doing what? Holding church. Obeying Hebrews 10, verse 25, you know, in violation of COVID restrictions. So if you wake up one day as a pastor and you read in your Bible Hebrews 10, verse 25, which says, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another all the more as you see the day drawing near. And you wake up and you say, you know what, today's Sunday, we're going to have church. Today's Wednesday night, we're going to have church. And you have church and you don't have proper respect for social distancing, or if you have too many people in the church, or if people aren't masked properly. In Canada, which is not too far from the late great United States of America, you go to jail. So we don't just have one pastor, not just 2, but potentially 3, and maybe 4. So here's another name to add to the list, Pastor Tim Stevens. This comes from rebelnews.com, May the 16th, 2021. Breaking Calgary police arrest. Who, a terrorist, a criminal, a drug dealer? No, a Fairview Baptist Church pastor, Tim Stevens, for doing what? What was his crime? Did he molest somebody? Was he laundering money? No, he was doing what a pastor is supposed to do. He was holding church. Tell us about that.
And we're used to hearing about things like this in other parts of the world. Well, now it's in our backyard. And here it is.
Here it is.
Pastor Tim Stevens of Fairview Baptist Church. Doesn't that sound like just a terrible place? In Calgary.
Sounds very jihadist to me.
Yes. Fairview Baptist Church in Calgary has been under police and Alberta Health Services surveillance for months because he refuses to limit his congregation and force them into masks. In our previous visits to the church, Alberta Health Services and the Calgary Police and bylaw can be seen interrupting church services. Stevens has been ticketed in the past for violating public health orders and is represented by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. Last week, there was a heavy police presence at his church, just one day after Pastor Arthur Pawlowski was taken into custody for breaching the restraining order Alberta Health Services got against unnamed Jane and John Doe for organizing non-compliant, illegal public gatherings. Today, after services at Fairview Baptist, Calgary police came to Tim's church and arrested him in front of his wife and crying children. Police would not tell Rebel News' K2 Simone why they were detaining him. The restraining order that led to the arrest of Pastor Arthur has since been amended to only apply to the named parties in the order: Chris Scott of the Whistle Stop Cafe and Glenn Carrott of United We Roll. As of now, it is not known why or where Stevens has been taken. Now that's just a frightening thing.
That's amazing.
Where is he? We don't know where he is.
Now, Pawlowski we've covered before, and he's been in the news again.
Yeah.
So you want to keep up with him. I'll tell you, Brother Jim, what bothers me so much about everything that's happened to our world since COVID is it's taken people that normally would be very upstanding, law-abiding, they would probably never in their whole life have any skirmish with the law.
Right.
They probably wouldn't have a traffic ticket. Suddenly, these people, because of COVID, are turned into common criminals.
That's right.
And that's the terrible thing that's happened
Yeah.
because of COVID. It's taken a whole category of law-abiding citizens, pillars of the community, and criminalized them.
Yeah.
I think that's by design.
I do too.
And so, here is global persecution. Well,
Never waste a crisis.
never let a crisis go to waste. Now, certainly around the world, and this is our last article, they would have respect for the First Amendment, wouldn't they?
Oh, yes.
Certainly internationalists would look into the United States and say, well, they have a First Amendment, so maybe we should respect it worldwide. The opposite is true. As you get outside the borders of the United States, they have no concept of a First Amendment. And quite frankly, it's rapidly disappearing within the borders of the United States of America as well. And you need look no further than Prince Harry,
Yes.
who has called the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, quote, bonkers, close quote.
Yes, and he did that while he was here in the United States, where he had the freedom to do so.
How interesting.
Isn't that ironic?
So here's our final article. It's from the Christian Post, May 19th, 2021. Franklin Graham, and I love Franklin Graham's response here. Franklin Graham tells Prince Harry what's great about the U.S. after Royal calls the First Amendment bonkers.
Yes. In an interview with actor Dax Shepard on the podcast Armchair Expert, Harry said he considered the First Amendment of the Constitution to be bonkers. Quoting, "I've got so much I want to say about the First Amendment, as I sort of understand it, but it is bonkers," said the Duke of Sussex. "I don't want to start going down the First Amendment route because that's a huge subject and one which I don't understand." Right? Listen to that. I don't understand because I've only been here a short time. But you can find a loophole in anything, The Spectator reported. In a Facebook post on Monday, Graham defended the U.S. Constitution and recommended that the British Royal learn more about it before making additional comments. Quoting, "My ancestors," this is Graham, "my ancestors were among those who came to this country to gain these freedoms. I am so thankful that I have the freedom to worship without government interference. And I thank God that the founders of our Constitution gave us this protection," wrote Graham. Maybe Prince Harry could take some time while he is in this country to study our history, and I think he will come to appreciate that the First Amendment is part of what makes America great, and one of the main reasons people have left everything to come here throughout history.
So thank you, Franklin Graham, for that public response. But, there's a mindset out there. And you saw this with the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I guess has passed on to her reward.
Yeah.
And we won't fill in the blank there.
No.
But she, in her Supreme Court opinions, would say, we need to be in touch with global opinion. There's something we can learn from the rest of the world. And she would use global opinion as a means of interpreting the United States Constitution. Google Lawrence versus Texas, a 2003 decision, and you'll see this globalist mindset coming into American jurisprudence. And I want people to understand something, that if you go global in terms of interpreting our Constitution, you're putting the Constitution in the hands of people that have no concept of what our country is based on. And in fact, who think the First Amendment, which is our most cherished amendment, I would argue, other than perhaps the Second Amendment, is bonkers.
Yeah.
And they just have no clue over it or about it.
Yeah.
And so as global persecution heats up, and it's heating up,
Yeah.
particularly in Canada, expect no help abroad from the concept of free speech
Yeah.
found in the United States Constitution. Don't expect it to be respected.
Yeah.
Didn't last week we show a video of the preacher, what was it, the UK, who was reading out of the Bible, Romans 1. He was yanked off his platform and basically was, forcibly taken away.
Yeah.
That's what's going on worldwide in terms of global persecution. So that's our prophecy update for today, folks. The world against Israel, the movement away from nationalism into globalism, media propaganda of a mind-numbing scale,
Yes.
cultural Marxism, right down to the books you pick
Woke
out for
babies.
your kids at Barnes & Noble, and global persecution.
Wow.
But Brother Jim, is it all bad news?
No, it isn't. Thank you, Jesus, right? Here it is. Titus 2:13. We, believers in Jesus Christ, we're looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior Christ Jesus.
So as the saying goes, things are not falling apart.
Right.
They're falling into place.
That's right.
We didn't originate that phrase, but we sure like it,
We do.
and we repeat it because the soon return of Jesus Christ is at hand.
And we need to be reminded of
Be
that.
reminded of that, and he is actually right at the door.
Amen.
Next week, I have a picture of this, is the Mid-America Prophecy Conference, May 28th and 29th, which I'm presenting at, along with a lot of my prophecy colleagues, Dr. David Reagan, Thomas Ice, Damon Duck, J.B. Hickson. So I'd appreciate prayers. I'm going to be presenting at that conference Friday and Saturday. So that means, Brother Jim, we're not having PPOV next Friday, the 28th. So we're going to resume June the 4th. But I am planning on, Brother Jim, to make it back in time to preach on Sunday, which would be, what would that be, the 30th, is it?
I believe that's
Of
correct,
May?
yes.
And so SLBC preaching schedule will go on as normal, but I will be involved in this conference Friday and Saturday. You know, when you promote a conference or tell people you're going to speak at a conference, the first thing people ask is there going to be live streaming? To get an answer to that question, I would say you have to go to their website to figure it out, because I don't know.
Yeah.
Go to Bible Prophecy as Written Ministries, and you can find out an answer to that question, or where you can get the CDs, or the DVDs if you're interested in the teachings of that conference. But this is not a UFO conference.
Oh, darn.
So many conferences that you attend that are so-called prophecy conferences are all about, green men.
But Pastor, Tucker Carlson told me that UFOs are real.
Green men from outer space and all of these kinds of things. No, this is a conference, and they're very clear on this in their marketing. We're going to do a conference from the Bible about prophecy.
Well,
So this
hallelujah.
This is a Bible.
It won't be a newspaper prophecy conference?
And it won't be a Martians conference
Wow.
either. And they promote themselves that way.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
so I spoke at it in 2019. I'm happy to do it again. So keep me in prayer on that, would you, as I'm trying to put my talks together. And beyond that, can you please lift up one of our production people that you guys don't see because he's not behind the camera. But what does the Apostle Paul say in 1 Corinthians 12? Those parts of the body that are less visible are indispensable.
Yes.
So that would include my wife, who's back there doing production.
Good thing you said that.
And she's assisted normally by Larry Bueller, who you guys don't know, but he has just had surgery and is in recovery.
Yes.
So Larry, we miss you being back here with us, and we're praying for a speedy recovery, and we would just invite people out there to pray for him.
Yes.
And one other quick thing as we close here, Brother Jim. People have told me this. They go, you must spend hours and hours and hours doing research. And you must have like a research team at Sugarland Bible Church. Do you know who my research team is? It's you out there watching. Because what happens is a lot of times you folks out there send me stuff.
Yeah.
And I look at it and I say, this is great. I can use this.
Yeah.
I don't have the time, talent, or energy to scour everywhere that needs to be scoured on the internet to do a prophecy update. But the folks out there, the great silent majority, as Richard Nixon used to call, his supporters, that's the force behind this show.
Yes.
This show has cutting edge material because of you people. And I would invite you to, if you see something that's noteworthy of a prophecy caliber, send it to me, and we'll check it out. And I was going to say something else, Brother Jim, but it escaped my mind. What do you have to say?
I hope you're ready to, when you get home after this program, to find your email box completely full.
Well, that might not be so great because I have to wade through all that. But there's just some wonderful things that people
That's
do.
right.
And, this show works because people support it.
That's right.
And they watch it, and they talk about it,
Yes.
and they share it.
Yeah. That's right.
And, if you guys weren't out there doing it, what are we? We're just a couple of guys sitting in a room talking to a camera. There's no power in it at all. But it's grassroots out there.
That's
make
true.
Pastor's point of view what it is. And
we're shocked.
We're shocked at how people like this show and use it and talk about it and share it. So you can do something as easy as clicking share.
Right.
On social media, and suddenly you expand this ministry into a reach that we couldn't get to.
Yeah.
So I just want to commend everybody out there, because we don't look at this as our show.
Right.
We look at it as your show.
Right.
It's not. It's all of us together. Trying to be salt and light in these last days. What would you add to that?
We're just the talking heads.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And I'm more of a talking head than you are.
Well,
That's debatable. That's debatable. So at this point, we're going to sign off, and we'll see you not next week, but the following week. God bless you.
God bless.